Okay, looks like we are running. Let us open up our clickety-clack logos. Welcome to Evolution Hour, the troubles in paradise, the exciting world of analog devices as we await impending doom. Whoops. There we go. Hit the wrong button twice. Okay. We are running on the show, as you know. We are continuing our analysis of Titans, the creationist book, which purports to be vastly more well-documented than it actually has turned out to be, as you have seen week on week. This is also a Casey Luskin week, where we get to go into the exciting world of Casey Luskin's, or rather the Sternberg Klinghoffer crowd, that merrily has been foisting hundreds of papers on us as supposedly showing that junk DNA is not a real thing. Hello, Barbara. And that this actually supports an intelligent design position. Well, spoiler alert, it doesn't, but this is a particular bit. And then I will also be doing a little digression on Edward Blyth and the recent Dan Stern Cardinale debate Bergman. I won't be bothering about sticking in a pile of links on that. I'll just put you up to speed. A lot of the material is going to be in Volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, so shameless plug and anticipation of that. But first of all, off onto our exciting little world of mosasaurs. This little section that I'm dealing with now is the tail end of their little mosasaur section. It's still a bunch of gee whiz stuff. One of their footnotes is tantalizingly sloppy, though. Kadumi HF Fossils of the Harana Fauna and the Adjacent Areas, pages 80 to 94, 2009. No journal, no book, no indication, no website, no indication of what the hell that is supposed to mean. Well, it turns out from the Eternal River Museum of Natural History, a little minor area. There's only then Sarfati and Tay out some papers by obligatory soft and all these little things. So a 2010 one, which, by the way, had a chronology of the shift forms that Sarfati and Tay made no effort to counter with their non-existent 2011 paper on Cretaceous. We'll read through all of that material and peruse how it's not really helping the creationist case. Plus, it's actually informing you about the nature of mosasaurs. Isn't that exciting? Yeah. The Luskin stuff is a delicious little pile. They brought up a paper from Lee and Larson 2021 on primate-specific ALU activity. And it's not actually accessible open access, but there's an awful lot of stuff in the excerpt that is available at Science Fact, and so I'll be putting the link up for that. And even from there, you can see how it relates to how diseases can arise from modifications to these ALU-connected stuff, which incidentally was covered in more detail in Larson et al. 2018, which I'll be putting a link up to, which is a paper not on the 800 list. This is starting to bring up an interesting aspect of the extent to which the DI list goes out of their way not to clarify the facts of things. I will be putting, there's a charming little quote from that 2021 work, which you can see even in the excerpt, that alludes to a bunch of additional sources, all of which, as it turns out, are open access. And we're going to be putting those links up in due course on that. So the quote is, ALUs originated in the ancestral primate genome, and their subsequent genomic expansion events corresponding to several ALU subfamilies are temporarily correlated with key events in primate brain evolution. Salem et al. 2003, Linker et al. 2017. Evidence supporting retrotransposons and SINE elements as drivers of brain and genome evolution, respectively, has been reviewed previously. Ferrari et al. 2021, Schmitz 2012. And so it goes under the category of what the hell did they think was the point of bringing up this Lee and Larson paper that only opens a ginormous can of worms about, again, the perfectly natural structure of ALUs, how their little shape and things can form, the little sidebars. One of the papers on here, newer work as well, coevolution between ApoBec3 and retrotransposon, others, is that got going when you look up all of this stuff is that ALUs already previously mentioned can connector things. And that leads off to a whole bunch of little cross connections that can be either good or bad, and often is rather bad. A recent paper that cited Lee and Larson, Modinini et al. 2022, which I'll be putting a link in as well, on the coevolution between ApoBec3 and retrotransposons in primate, about where the field is now about the understanding of what all of these things fit into the larger biological evolutionary context. And that, by the way, is another work not on the 800 list. So it's reminding us of the pattern that the DI have of selective site been a factor that's been going on quite a ways, and the fact that we've been dealing with the ongoing matter of theodicy insofar as a lot of these things connect up and have caused disease. This is going to prove even more so in the next installment in a couple of weeks, that I tumbled onto a delicious little factor that was quite accidental, in fact. And in fact, that accidental stumbling on things that I wasn't expecting to find, that I go, oh gosh, that's rather interesting, relates to that Edward Blyth matter that I have on the list, and Dan's debate with Jerry Bergman as a sidebar. So first, Edward Blyth. Don't expect anybody to really recall that name right off the bat. I barely remembered it. Edward Blyth was a contemporary of Darwin, that a little cottage industry of critics of Darwin, especially ones popping out of the woodwork in the around the Darwin bicentennial in 2009, were insisting that Blyth had come up with natural selection in the way Darwin thought of it beforehand, and Darwin was just copying him and plagiarizing him. And this has been a little cottage industry trope that has worked its way into some creationist apologetics, and as we will be seeing, a sidebar of intelligent design stuff. It popped up on my scope more frequently because of the fact that the Vice Rhino had done a video just a couple days ago that I caught that was going after Calvin Smith, the Canadian Answers in Genesis guy. And along the way, I'd actually seen some excerpts of this. I think Dapper Dino and a few other people have lit into this thing that it's the one where Calvin Smith is in front of a bunch of books that are stacked up to impress us as to how much research he's supposedly done on this. Anyway, along the way, Vice Rhino had actually gone into an item that I had kind of glanced past, which was Smith's repetition of the charge that Darwin plagiarized Blyth. And Vice Rhino, bless his heart, was looking into some of the background details on these things, because it involves burrowing down into these verbose postings that Blyth had done back in the 1830s, which turned out to be available online. Ta-da! And so we could look up the original material and see all the little fun games on it. I had a little tiny bit of stuff on Blyth already in my reference field, but I was able to expand a lot on that, following up on the material that Vice Rhino was bringing, as well as a little cross-check to see what the post was up at the Wikipedia, which brought up the various controversies that have been done over the years. Hans Eisler, and or not well, forgot his first name, Lauren Isley, and a few others who made a big deal out of this stuff back in the 1950s, but it's become a dead letter because we now know much more about the correspondence between Darwin and Blyth, and how they got along quite nicely, respected each other, and Blyth was kind of sidling towards more of an evolutionary view in some respects. But the major fun point involved the fact that his view on natural selection was effectively a conserving kind of thing, initially kind of within a kind idea, rather than generating whole new species and divergent lineages, which is the Darwinian approach to things. Anyway, even Todd Wood had weighed in on this at one point. The funky little part was that in cross-checking the little daisy chain, I found a post from the National Center for Science Education that was discussing this bit, and he was complaining. This was in 2000, I think 2010, 2013, somewhere. That was complaining about posts from a lot of anti-evolutionists, and one involved Sal Cordova that was popping up on Uncommon Descent. And in 2006, Sal was kind of in his generic intelligent design phase, although he has mutated around that time and since into becoming an unabashed young earth creationist. But the funky part was the bad scholarship involved, because it turned out that the vast majority of the arguments that were being proposed by Sal, as though this were his own original scholarly research, were cribbed from an English anti-evolutionist named Bradbury, who eventually took note of this and kind of whined about how parasitical this Sal Cordova, whoever the hell he is, was. And doubled is that Bradbury's scholarship is just as bad as Sal's. Because he was making claims about, for example, how Ernst Mayr was being used in this issue, that fortunately I was able to find the original source material that Ernst Mayr was being quoted on. And this Bradbury guy had explicitly ellipsed out the evidence that was blowing to smithereens the point that he was trying to make about how Ernst Mayr hadn't refuted this Isley argument about Darwin. So here you got somebody who's a very sloppy scholar, Bradbury, getting siphoned by Cordova, who rattles on about the subject. So I was, it was really kind of interesting to find out some of the backgrounds and to find out more about what Blyth's position was and all that kind of stuff. And then just a few days ago, Dan Stern Cardinale had a very lengthy 2-hour plus debate on Standing for Truth's little channel, and bless his heart, Standing for Truth, Donnie was very polite and all behaving in a nice, pleasant little manner, although what will happen in his postings after that when he unsheathes the creationism knives is another matter. Jerry Bergman, who I had not actually seen in a debate before, he's only 6 years old. My gosh, he looks like a doddering old thing. And I'm exactly a spring chicken, but yes, yipes. I think I'm in better health and more spry than he is. Anyway, Dan did just a whiz-bang job of setting up. The debate was about common descent versus common design. And Dan did a just ingeniously clever bit, which was to point out that genetics will produce phylogenies, and if design is true, that you should be able to tell a phylogeny that doesn't connect up properly, that produces blurry relationships, that won't sync up accurately, and that theoretically you should be able to tell one from another just on the basis of design. Whereas branching phylogeny that occurs within a kind is okay from a creationist perspective, branching phylogenies that spread across kinds is verboten. So Dan, bless his heart, offered up 4 examples of trees where he had removed the taxa information and such. So it was just the topology and the bootstrap numbers and all that kind of material that was in play. And 2 of them are from what creationists agree are the same kind, and 2 of them are not from the same kind. The other 2 are examples that spill over kind boundaries. And Bergman was asked by Dan to see if he would be able to identify them. Well, in a way, he got a 50-50 chance to work it out. And bless his heart, he managed to get 50% of it wrong. In other words, 2 of them involved rodents, which would be the same kind, and 2 of them involve primates and simians, which no creationist is arguing is a single kind. And it turns out he looked at, eyeballed them, and decided that one of the ones, he picked out 2 that he contended were the same kind. One of them was the rodent one of them was the simian one. And the 2 he was insisting were separate ones. One of them was the rodent one, and another was the primate. So he was doing no better than chance. And it was a delicious reminder how the creationist model is useless. It's never going to explain anything. And Bergman had a chance to strut his stuff. It turned out, if you ever have a chance to watch the debate, Bergman is running out of ideas. He's just basically obsessing on the same kind of trope to come from, and he so anxiously wanted to discuss the fossil record, which would be an irrelevancy for Dan, because Dan's not a paleontologist. I would love it if we had somebody in our direct network, although Dapper Dino, delicious glee on that, if they ever had an input on the subject. But Bergman is a pompous and overconfident pseudo-scholar for a very long time. He has an obsession that he is constantly banging, and in fact, that's his current research, is looking into how Darwinism has been a terrible and pernicious influence, and it's fostered racism and nasty effects in society. And he cherry picks his way through issues and conveniently leaves out the part that might be played by religious people and creationists. And I kind of stumbled on Bergman's bad side in this area quite a long time ago, and I've to it peripherally in my writings of old, but we'll be dealing with it more hopefully in volume 2 of the Rocks there. Had to do with Bergman's claim, and I think it was a thing that he did like in the late 1990s, where he was insisting that Darwinism it was the attitude behind the extinction of the Tasmanian people, the little island of Tasmania off the coast of Australia. And he cherry-picked little bits and pieces of things, but the problem was the chronology was all completely wrong. As soon as you started looking into the dates on things and burrowed past the coverage that Bergman was offering, you discovered that the Tasmanians were being rounded up and put into like gulags back early 19th century, and most of them had dropped dead by the time Darwin was going on the Beagle, and therefore in no sense whatsoever could Darwinian thinking have been responsible. What was responsible for a lot of it was imperialism and colonialism, which are issues that Bergman has not wanted to address tightly. One of the recurring themes that's going to be in volume 2 of Rocks Were There involves that information suppression regarding creationist and theocratic Christian racism and oppression of peoples. And the idea that it's all Darwinism's fault and evolution and naturalism's fault is historical revisionism on a gobsmacking scale. Bergman is one of the persistent offenders in this area. And we'll be raking Bergman over the coals on a lot of other topics as well in the course of things. Ironically, on this Blyth matter from the 1830s, the volume, because in order to get the material, it was basically downloading the entire year issue from this old natural history magazine from Britain. And naturally, I've downloaded a whole big thing that's 700 or 800 pages long. So I might as well find out what else is in there. And it turns out that there, in the 1835 article, there was also an absolutely delicious thing on identifying what Leviathan and Behemoth was. And so this put us into a perspective on what believers thought about identifying these critters back in the early 19th century. The whale is a possibility for Leviathan, the hippopotamus or elephant for Behemoth, and the separate issue of what tannins were, which were kind of reptile-y things, which some modern anti-evolutionists have tried to drag in to suggest those are just like dinosaurs, maybe. But looking back in this fellow from the 19th century, he was kind of trying to drag it in some of the early being discovered dinosaurs. So he was thinking the behemoth was an iguanodon, and that Leviathan was a megalosaurus. Those were basically the only two dinosaurs that were terribly well known back in that early days. And also because he wasn't necessarily thinking really, really deep time, although he wasn't a young Earth creationist at this point. He has definite indications that okay with a longer frame. He just didn't dwell on it a great deal. He wasn't a geologist. He was a zoologist by training. Anyway, it was an interesting little sidebar to remind us what the circumstances of belief were back in that period. We're looking at, so I think I'm here. Uh, I am at and so and again. without whom. Thank you, everybody. We had a little bit, even though the video feed wasn't glitching, wasn't connected with that stuff. What do I know? I'm just an old video. Yeah, there we go. Anyway, thank you everybody who can help out on the little project. Yeah, they finally overrode net neutrality. Yes, money talks even when it's full of shit. Those of us who live in the God King Emperor Donald the Infallible will be reincarnated as Emperor of the known universe. Like, I'm recording the thing and we'll catch it later after I can, have a lot of antacids or things available to see what's going on. The irony of it being in the rotunda, where of course the mob was attacking only 4 years ago, is not lost on me. Trumpistas will be gloating all get out, and Mr. Trump presumably will be hitting the ground running with his gazillion executive orders. TikTok, apparently, which was by statute, was phased out, is kind of still back on, which shows that Donald Trump can strong arm a congressional law and just make it go away by fiat, which is kind of an eccentric little thing to deal with. But fasten your seatbelts. As of tomorrow, we're going to have a very bumpy time. And the Trumpistas will be making a lot of people. The problem is that it's not going to be just a streaming app. I'm anticipating really serious economic messes ahead, and that is going to hit their own people in an enormous way. And a lot of those Trumpistas who have been getting into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and the Trump administration is apparently going to be favoring a lot of that stuff with unregulation. What could go wrong? 1929 can go wrong. So it's going to be an interesting time. And by the time we beeble bond down to it's going to be an interesting thing. And I can't even project what might be. Trump is actually going to try to take the Panama Canal or invade or any of the other cockamamie harebrained things he's done, or rename the Gulf of Mexico America. How exactly does one do that? Do you order Rand McNally and map makers all over the planet and Google Earth and all these people to just suddenly do that? This is weird. And I'm seeing that if you total up all the different things that Trump does that are basically troping things that have been circulating around his mental drain now for quite a few years, and in some cases going back even farther. His brain is petrifying back in the past, and so he's going to try to play out his cosplay presidency that will have some short-term bad effects. I think the big long-term effect, ironically, won't be any legislation or stuff that they'll be putting through, or even Supreme Court rulings, although those are going to be messing that as well. But all of that can be redressed if you have a progressive phase where you can have amendments of the Constitution correcting a lot of these things, and there can be a lot of stuff. Former Marine from before they reformed the boot camps, it's handleable, yeah. I think the longer-term thing that we'll never get back because of a second Trump term is that the default position the United States had as an honest broker world leader, it's gone. We'll never get it back. It will still play tactically often very important and decent roles on the world stage, but that deferral level that we had for all administrations from the Second World War to the present, gone. Poof. We'll never get it back, thanks to the God King Emperor. So anyway, that's going to be really, really fun and funky. You'll be able to read about a lot of the material on, as I mentioned, on Blyth and Stern Cardinale and all of that in the appropriate chapters in the new volume that we're working on. Jackson and I are having a lot of fun with this material, and we're constantly slipping in the latest technical literature to make sure that it's as up to date as possible, up to the publication date of the book, which I'm guesstimating maybe summer or fall. We'll be able to see how that works out. Yes, trust once lost is very hard earned, and so we'll not be out of the phase of things. If you think of the fact that we got 300 some million people in on a planet that's got 8 billion, are we going to be like calling the shots forever? Obviously not. And the fact that strong-armed Chinese with their 1 billion plus want to play a major part on the stage, and they've got enough economic clout to be able to do so, that was kind of an inevitable thing that I was anticipating back 40 years ago when I was projecting what the 21st century would be like in an old science fiction story that I worked on. But think long term, though, the Chinese are their own worst enemies because they have a kind of a sense that nobody can ever teach them anything, that everything they do will be cleverer than you are, even as they might be adapting other people's ideas in kind of a reverse of the old bit where the Chinese invented everything and then everybody else made use of it. But their Belt and Road project is just naked imperialism. And as anybody knows from any colonial power, that they tend to produce resentment. In the long run, this is not going to be helping the Chinese impressions abroad. So the rest of the century is going to be very, very interesting and exciting, and we'll see how things go. The Chinese might have a vested interest, by the way, since we're such a big trading partner, that they wouldn't want the economy to collapse here because we're too big of a market to deal with. And many interesting things. We're going to be seeing what happens. Trump's 1970s brain on non-electric cars, how much that is actually going to affect anything. Is questionable because if you're General Motors or Ford and you want to sell in Europe or elsewhere, what else would you do but make sure that you're on the market? You don't want to concede things to the Chinese that are going electric technology with a vengeance. So a lot of that stuff is going to happen whether the Trump administration likes it or not, and a lot of the states will be continuing these things whether the Trump administration likes it or not. So it's going to be funky. Also, I saw Steve Bannon on this week with Stephanopoulos, and that was he's awfully quiet and calm and air quotes reasonable sounding when he's in those sorts of venues. And then he still kind of maintains a low drone, but then he gets more extremist and nasty when he's on his own channel type. No discussion occurred in the show about the impending trial that Bannon is facing in New York over that wall fraud, where he and a bunch of people were pocketing money to build part of the wall down on the border and weren't doing a damn thing, and they were just feathering their own nest. He got off on this first because Trump gave him clemency, but it clumsily did it in such a way that it didn't preclude states doing something, and New York is doing exactly that. So even during the early Trump administration, you may be finding dear old bloated anarchist Bannon in a lot of court dates. And if he lawyers up and delays enough, it's not impossible that he could be actually hitting the kind of trial mode at the time when the economy is falling apart. And that's going to alter the slack that a jury might be giving him. I mean, if you're facing doom, are you really going to be all that conciliatory towards the bloated anarchist who was cheating people? And of course, the Trump people they're grifting like mad. Melania is doing stuff, and they've got these little crypto things popping around that will be, at least on paper, funneling huge swaths of air quotes money into a lot of these people's hands for a while. But all of that stuff can vaporize overnight, as we've seen some of the previous crypto bubbles. And I think as well, because the energy level required for these Bitcoin mines, as well as AI, tested democracy, I guess we all have something to compare oligarchy to. Yeah, well, yes. And in fact, anybody that's in, like I'm thinking about how Marketplace on NPR, will have a golden opportunity to actually observe a economic depression firsthand. All of the analyses and studies that they would have been doing were historical in nature. And now we'll have all the modern tools of media and data crunching and all the rest to be able to look at the observations of the sinking ship while it's sinking and while we're on it. So it's going to be an interesting and exciting time in a not happy way, not exciting time, but it will, I think, end up shredding an awful lot of not the extreme MAGA. If you look at people like Tony Perkins and Tucker Carlson and all the rest, they're so far out in Looney Tunes that no amount of information can ever change their mind on anything. They're hyper ideologues and relentless. But there are certainly millions of people in the mid-range who weren't properly informed or decided not to heed the warnings of people warning about what was going to be happening, who are going to be facing the direct consequences of the stupidity in a way that is impossible for their brains to ignore. If you're unemployed or you're losing your house or you find that there are shortages at the grocery store and prices are through the roof, all the pronouncements coming from the God King Emperor and his flacks on Fox, Trump, Pravda, or Newsmax are going to just, they'll reach this point where you've got that cognitive dissonance moment that can occur in a variety of contexts. One occurred with the Communist Party in 1956 when Khrushchev announced that Stalin had made mistakes. That produced the biggest drop of people from the Communist Party. Even they didn't leave when the tanks rolled through Hungary. They did leave when Khrushchev said Stalin had lied. So we'll see whether or not we've got a dynamic like that going on here. And it's important for everybody that actually favors reason and sound method to be on hand locally and otherwise on media to explain what the facts are, to defend the truth and reality, to remind people when shit is hitting fan, why it's shit and why there's a fan and why you're in trouble. And to counter all of the absurdities that are going on. And so this may be an opportunity to lay a groundwork for a genuine progressive phase, which is what occurred after the Great Depression of the 1890s and also occurred as a result of the Great Depression of the 1920s and 30s. So it's going to be interesting. Yes, crypto is the biggest energy hog on the planet, as well as AI. AI is a colossal energy hog. And if you have some of these Bitcoin things are like out in the middle of nowhere in relatively unpopulated states. If you have a situation where desperate people are looking at the difference between having heat for their homes and lighting for their homes and power going into the ginormous Bitcoin mine, will some people blow a transformer to end that? And if so, if a Bitcoin mine loses its power all of a sudden, billions of dollars can just go poof, gone. And this is going to be an interesting thing, especially since the Trump administration is really down on the idea of regulation. And we're going to discover in a hurry that there's a reason why we have all these little safety nets in play. And the more that they attempt to get rid of them, ironically, they're going to be hurting the red states more than the blue states. We have a bunch of networks of support frames in the blue states, and we're also more productive than the red states. And we've been subsidizing them through these income transfers for decades. And so, ironically, to the extent that MAGA actually cuts out a lot of these things, they're going to be screwing their own people. I don't think a lot of these folk have the foggiest clue that things can go really, really wrong. They've all lived during reasonably good economic times. They've had mild recessions, but nothing worse and all the rest. So it's going to be an interesting little material to go on. Hello, Lisa. Our signal kind of got back on. We had a little bit of a glitch earlier, but it seems to be running a little bit more steadily now. So everybody, there's a lot to be going on. As President Biden said in his final address, it's up to us. There's everybody out there who still has a functioning brainstem has got to do what we can in whatever ways we can to stand up for proper ways. And there's going to be areas in so many different circumstances, and to do so in a way that's not angry and that's not snarky, although the urge for Schadenfreude, bring out some popcorn while we watch the oligarchs blow themselves to smithereens financially. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. And there will be about a year, in my impression, that the Trumpistas are going to be running amok. And then all that sowing that they have done is going to start reaping. And whoops, it's going to be me. So anyway, let me put up my little advert for Rocks Were There Volume 1. And come on, little bastard. Let me get you over there. And let me put you up there. And away we go. And I will remind everybody, parallels, I'm busy working on that. Part of my brain, after all, is series of Sarah that used to be and the Duke or something like that. I got their front name wrong. Anyway, it's a charming little mystery about an English woman detective in the 1880s, and I will just, as a historian, pay attention to the inauguration just to circumstance it. I'll just check it sometime later when my stomach can handle it. As a general rule, avoid ever hearing a Trump press conference or speech, because his voice and his manner and his extremism and his bluster and bluff, we've been through that in the prior term. Nothing is going to change. We're going to be replaying the same tropes over and over again. Anyway, on that mystery, every once in a while they make historical inaccuracies. And there was one on the latest episode where some of the characters sit down and they start playing a game of gin rummy, and they call it gin rummy, which is a neat trick for the 1880s, since the game wasn't invented until like 1909. So, oopsie. So I always love it when even the professionals on this apparently can't quality control the little sidebar details. Just as a couple seasons back, I'm going to fertilizer here for the now. How it must tell you, are we losing? That it tells you something about the mindset of the average Trumpista, that they can listen to Donald Trump and not have their brain explode from just the annoyance of how he sounds. So it's very curious indeed. Not even a resonant orator in the way Hitler was. We listened to him in German. He was actually quite an eerily effective orator. In terms of the content, little chunks of stuff, particularly in the stump speeches, the coincidence between what Trump says and what Hitler would do in his speeches is not coincidental, because he studied the speeches and how he would manipulate a crowd and all the rest. Trump is also totally addicted to the crowds. He got to have the rallies. So he's going to be doing that as much as possible until we get down to the point when the economy is falling apart. And at some stage, you're going to have a lot of his supporters pleading for the God King Emperor to make things all better, and are going to be kind of pissed off when he doesn't, at which point Trump, who's on a down point, and this is going to be an interesting little thing to deal with. The one that I would definitely want to skip for watching will be the State of the Union address next month, where Trump will come out. I mean, I'll want to know what the content was, but oh lordy be, listening to him would be absolutely appalling. So anyway, we're in for an interesting time where we will either go through hell and make a better America, or we'll go through hell and that will be the end of the republic. So I prefer the first option. And so that when we come out of this, we'll have shown in no uncertain terms why putting convicted felon, pathological liar, malignant narcissist nincompoops in power is a bad idea. And we need to have a source methods revolution that gets media paying attention to grilling politicians at source level, which they do not do currently. And I don't think they recognize that that's an important thing to do. It's a sea change that we source methods advocates, pretty much all of whom have come at it kind of by the seat of the pants. We just come to discover that's the proper way of doing things. It needs to become much more widespread. And if we can't inculcate that on a larger scale, it's a problem, as people have instantaneous access to twaddle, and they need to be able to have instantaneous desire to fact check stuff to make sure that they don't accept all of that. So, it would not surprise me that if his mental state deteriorates to the point, and this is independent of whether or not we have an economic failure, the power hungriness of Vance and his little puppet master Teal could very easily want to try to oust him under the 25th Amendment. And at that point, the kids may start pouncing to try to get their inheritance while they still have some. And that will be yet more cognitive dissonance as all the cracks in that voracious regime start coming into play. So there's going to be an awful lot going on here that it will be shocking and surprising and pathetic, but none of it should be surprising in relation to what Mr. Trump is capable of doing, because we've seen what a personality type he has, and he hasn't changed 1 millimeter in the last 40 years. So anybody that is like, oh my heavens, Mr. Trump is being a bluffing, exaggerating chaos generator, no, that's who he is. So anyway, everybody stay safe. It's going to be bitter cold through most of the United States. We're on kind of the edge of that here, so we're dropping down into the teens, but we're not. I'm not at all sure that this won't be the first winter in a long time where there won't be any snow. It's a different dynamic, but anyway, it's exceedingly cold. So as a consequence, 80-year-old Trump is going to be inaugurated in the warmth of the Capitol. You think people could bring along poop and the poo-poo and toss at him to make him feel comfortable from the January 6th approach? I don't think anybody will be doing that, alas. Maybe the next time around. We'll see what happens at the funeral. That's which will not be. I think it would be a disgrace to the country if, when Trump finally dies, that he would be given a state funeral in the rotunda. If my modeling and anticipations are such, he won't have a reputation where anyone is going to want to suggest that. It'd be like sticking Stalin in there. So anyway, we'll be seeing what's going on, and everybody stay safe. Watch out for wooden penguins, and buy the books, and help the project if you can at the Patreon level. Although bear in mind, economic roadblocks ahead, so make sure that your finances can accommodate that kind of thing. I wouldn't want anybody to stick their neck out for this old fart. So anyway, everybody, I'll see you next week. I'll be putting the links in once the signal finalizes. Au revoir.